Before we start our Zentangle, we first need to practice creating some patterns. For this assignment, you will need a sheet of paper, a pencil, and a straight edge, which is just something with a rigid edge that you can use to draw a straight line. To start, we need to grid out our paper, which just means we need to make some small squares that are equal in size. To do this, you'll need some sort of tool to measure. Now, in an ideal world, we would all use a ruler, but since we don't have one, we're going to just use our finger. I'm going to use the distance from the top of my pointer finger to my second knuckle. I'll start by putting my knuckle on the edge of the left side of my paper and then making a mark where the tip of my finger is. Then moving to the right, I'll put my knuckle on the mark I just made and then make another mark at the tip of my finger. I will repeat this until the tip of my finger goes off of the paper. Then I will do the same thing along the bottom, working left to right, making marks at the tip of my finger and lining up my knuckle with my previous mark. Now I will use my straight edge to connect the marks I have made. As I said before, a straight edge is nothing more than something with a rigid, straight edge that you can use to draw a straight line. This can be the edge of a book, a cutting board, a piece of wood, just anything you have laying around. When I'm done, I should have relatively straight, even lines. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but it should be close enough for this exercise, so don't worry if it isn't exact. Next, I will turn my paper vertically and do the same thing, and I should be left with rows and columns of squares. I understand that everyone has different size hands, but we're looking for 20 tiles total. If you have extra squares or rectangles along your edges, that's completely fine. Remember, it's not going to be perfect. You can just ignore those. And if you're having a really hard time with this, don't sweat it. You can freehand 20 squares by making 5 rows and 4 columns without measuring anything. Just do your best to make all of your rows and columns the same size. Once you have your grid done, it's time to start filling the tiles up with patterns. To start, Google search Zentangle patterns and find 1 or 2 resources you like. Or you can reference one of the Zentangle pattern references I have available for you on the class website. In either case, you're going to want to start off by trying to copy some of the patterns in these references. I don't often tell you to copy things from online sources, but this is just to get us in the swing of things. Once you get more comfortable, feel free to try creating your own. Now, before we get started, I do want you to take some considerations. First, I don't want you to just copy the easiest patterns you find. Really use this as an opportunity to challenge yourself. Not only will this help you become a better artist, but it will ultimately result in your final Zentangle looking much better. Second, you need to be sure to have a variety of values in your patterns. Now, I know that we learned that value is the lightness or darkness of a color, and we normally see that represented in a stepped value scale like this one here. It shows us a range of values from dark to light. Now, I know we aren't using any color in our Zentangles, we're using patterns made out of shapes, lines, and textures. However, shapes, lines, and textures can also be used to create value. Take a look at these scales. They have a similar effect as the step scale we looked at before, but they are made using line, shapes, and textures, which are the components of our patterns. And they show us a range of values from dark to light. And changing the value of a pattern is pretty simple. To make a pattern darker, add more stuff to it and keep that stuff close together. To make it lighter, use less stuff and keep it farther apart. One more thing. Even though we're doing this in pencil, I don't want you to use sensitive line or blend. In other words, don't create value like this. The reason is because we're going to eventually do these in permanent marker, so you won't be able to use this technique. Instead, think of ways to make your values with line, shape, and texture. Look at my example. I'm going to start out with a relatively simple pattern. Remember, a pattern is just the repetition of visual elements. So for this first pattern, I'm simply taking a series of lines and repeating them. When I'm finished, I can compare this to my value scale and see that I have something that looks like a midtone. Since the assignment asked me to make a variety of values, I'll make my next one darker. To do this, I'm adding a lot more lines, and I'm even filling in some of my shapes with black. Finally, to make my lightest pattern, I'm creating one that has small shapes created from lines spaced further apart. You'll need to repeat this process for all 20 squares, and remember, this is just an exercise, but the more effort you put in here, the easier your project will be. Good luck.